In today's video, I'm going to count down 15 of the largest landowners in the world. Now, these aren't countries or governments, they're private individuals, families, companies, and organizations that control huge stretches of land, sometimes larger than entire nations. Let's start with number 15, Gina Rinehart. Gina Rinehart, the Australian mining magnate and heiress to the Hancock prospecting empire, is not only one of the richest women in the world, but also one of its largest private landowners. As of some verified reports, she owns an estimated 22.7 million acres of land across Australia. That's an area roughly the size of South Korea. Most of the property's cattle-producing land, and that shows her growing interest beyond the iron ore mining industry and into large-scale agriculture. Through her company, Hancock Agriculture, and its subsidiary, K. Kidman & Company, she controls a network of cattle stations that span multiple states, including Queensland, the Northern Territory, Western Australia, and South Australia. The 2016 acquisition of S. Kidman was especially significant. That deal completed in partnership with Shanghai Cred. That's a Chinese company that took a minority stake, added more than 20 million acres to Rinehart's holdings, and that purchase came after a government review that restricted full foreign ownership, allowing her to step in as the majority Australian buyer. Now, the S. Kidman stations, they're some of the largest single pastoral leases on the planet. They include properties like Anna Creek Station in South Australia. That's often cited as the world's largest cattle station, covers more than 23,000 square kilometers, which is larger than the entire country of Israel. Together, these properties produce hundreds of thousands of cattle per year and supply domestic and export beef markets. Now, her land holdings, though, have occasionally sparked some public debate in Australia about wealth concentration and land access. Critics have raised concerns about environmental impacts, water usage, and some foreign partnerships, but supporters argue that her investment has revitalized rural areas, operations, and created employment in these regions. And while Rinehart's net worth fluctuates with global iron ore prices, her land empire represents a tangible, stable asset. Now, although precise current figures can vary depending on the valuation method and the lease structure, she holds over 20 million acres, and it puts her among the top private landowners on the planet. Her case shows how large-scale land ownership today often blends traditional agriculture with industrial-scale management, and it makes her empire one of the most modern examples of private control over a huge territory anywhere in the developed world. Number 14, King Abdullah's royal successor. Following the death of King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz Al Saud in 2015, control of Saudi Arabia's huge royal estates passed collectively into the broader Saudi royal family and the state itself. While the land is technically state-owned under the Saudi system, the royal family exercises personal control over an enormous area of territory. Estimates vary, but the analysis from land governance researchers and property records suggest that the Saudi royal family directly and indirectly oversees as much as 124 million acres within the kingdom. The control isn't structured like Western-style private ownership. Instead, it operates under the Saudi Arabia legal framework, which all land ultimately belongs to the state, but it can be allocated for royal use or administered by royal decree. The late king himself was known for developing major projects across the land, including the King Abdullah Initiative for Saudi Agricultural Investment Abroad, which did tie some domestic land use to international food security programs. Now, big stretches of the Arabian Peninsula have been used for royal projects. Now, these range from experimental desert agriculture to breeding programs for camels and horses, and even more recently, new megacities and tourism initiatives like Neom and the Red Sea Project. Neom, for example, is planned as a futuristic megacity that might cover about 6.5 million acres of northwestern Saudi Arabia along the Red Sea. It's managed under the direct supervision of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, King Abdullah's half-brother. And projects of this scale, entire cities and regions, they show how the royal family's influence is extending way beyond traditional private ownership. The Saudi royal family's control of the land is therefore symbolic and functional. It encompasses royal palaces, protected reserves, energy installations, and state-backed development zones, and in total, the household consists of thousands of members and many hold large estates or desert tract. Some of the lands are used for housing royal complexes and resorts, while others are reserved for hunting and conservation. And this system of land control shows the unique governance model in Saudi Arabia, where sovereignty and property are intertwined. Rather than individual land titles, authority over land flows through royal decrees and national projects. In practical terms, the royal family's influence over Saudi territory rivals or exceeds any private landowner anywhere in the world. Number 13. The Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church is widely known as one of the largest non-state landholders in the world, although the exact total land area can't be precisely calculated. Unlike a single private owner or corporation, the Church's land is held through a decentralized global structure made up of dioceses, parishes, religious orders, trusts, and foundations. What is clear from land registries and academic studies is that the Church controls millions of acres worldwide, and it makes it one of the most significant controlling institutions in history. At the center of the system is what's known as the Holy See, which governs the Church spiritually and administratively. The Holy See directly controls Vatican City. However, this tiny little area represents only the symbolic core of a much larger land network. In Europe alone, the Catholic Church is one of the largest landowners in countries like Italy, Spain, France, Austria, and Germany. In Italy, church-affiliated entities own thousands of buildings, and large rural estates have accumulated over the centuries. Outside Europe, the Church's land footprint is even more geographically expansive. In Latin America, Catholic dioceses and religious orders historically controlled huge tracts of agricultural land, some of which remain under Church ownership today. In countries like Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico, lands include ranches, forests, and mission territories, though land reforms in the 20th century have reduced some holdings. In Africa, Catholic missions acquired large areas for schools, hospitals, farms, and conservation zones during the colonial period, and many of these properties remain active. The Church is also a major landowner in the U.S. Catholic institutions collectively own tens of thousands of properties: churches, universities, hospitals, cemeteries, and even rural land. According to the U.S. Diocesan Financial Disclosures and Independent Property Analysis, the Church is among the largest private real estate holders in several states. And while most of this land is not contiguous, the cumulative area is substantial. One challenge in quantifying church land ownership is that properties are legally owned by individual dioceses or orders, rather than a single central authority. For example, the Jesuits, Benedictines, Franciscans, and other orders each maintain independent property portfolios. Some own large agricultural estates or forested lands. Others manage historic vineyards, olive groves, and ranches that have been in continuous operation for centuries. But what distinguishes the Catholic Church from other large landholders is the continuity of its ownership. Much of its land has been held for hundreds of years, surviving wars, revolutions, and political upheaval, and in many regions, church lands are among the oldest continually managed properties in existence. Today, the Church's land use is primarily for religious, educational, medical, and agricultural use. And while it doesn't generate income from leasing and farming, it doesn't operate as a conventional profit-driven land empire either. Even so, though, by sheer geographic reach and cumulative area, the Roman Catholic Church is among the largest land-controlling entities in the world. Number 12. King Charles III. King Charles III is one of the largest landholders in the world, though much of the land associated with him is held under unique arrangements rather than a standard private ownership. As monarch of the United Kingdom, he's linked to several huge land portfolios, most notably the Crown Estate, the Duchy of Lancaster, and his private estates like Balmoral and Sandringham. Together, those holdings encompass hundreds of thousands of acres across the UK and beyond. The Crown Estate is the largest component, about 655,000 acres, including the agricultural land and forests. Legally, the estate doesn't belong to King Charles personally. It's held in right of the Crown and managed independently. Revenues from the estate are surrendered to the UK Treasury, with a portion returned to the monarch through the sovereign grant. But despite the distinction, the monarch is the legal embodiment of the Crown, and it makes this land inseparable from the institution of the monarchy. In addition to the Crown Estate, King Charles controls the Duchy of Lancaster, which spans about 25,000 acres, and the estate provides income for the monarch in his role as Duke of Lancaster and includes rural land, urban property, and historic estates, primarily in northern England. And unlike the Crown Estate, revenues from this one flow directly to the monarch for official and private expenses. Until his accession to the throne in 2022, Charles also controlled the Duchy of Cornwall, one of the largest private land estates in the UK. That covered about 75,000 acres, and the estate now belongs to his son, Prince William. However, during his decades as Prince of Wales, Charles oversaw large-scale agricultural management across Cornwall, Devon, Hertfordshire, and other counties, which shaped the modern land use practice. Balmoral Castle in Scotland and Sandringham House in England. Balmoral covers over 25,000 acres and it consists largely of moorland, forests, and farmlands. Sandringham covers roughly 10,000 acres and the estates are privately owned by the monarch and are not part of the Crown estate system. Some land is clearly private, some is legally public but inseparable from the monarchy, and some exist in a long-standing trust tied to the Crown. This makes direct comparisons with billionaires and corporations pretty hard. But when considering land associated with his position and the private estates combined, King Charles III ranks among the world's most significant land-controlling individuals. Number 11. Ted Turner. Ted Turner, he's one of the largest landowners, with land holdings that are usually well documented and verifiable compared to many other individuals on this list. Over several decades, Turner has accumulated about 2 million acres across the U.S., primarily in the form of ranches, grasslands, and conservation-focused properties. At his peak, he was widely cited as the single largest private landowner in the country, and his land portfolio spans at least 7 states: Montana, New Mexico, Nebraska, Kansas, Florida, South Dakota, and Georgia. The majority of his land is organized under the Turner Enterprises Incorporated. That's the company he founded to manage his ranching, conservation, and hospitality. One of his most notable properties is the Weyerhaeuser Park Ranch in northeastern New Mexico. It covers about 500,000 acres. This single ranch is larger than the state of Rhode Island, and it includes mountains, forests, grasslands, and wildlife habitat. The park is managed as a conservation area and a private recreation property. Turner is also the largest private owner of bison in the world, with herds numbering in the tens of thousands. His ranches are managed primarily for bison production rather than conventional cattle, which has shaped land use practice across his properties. Bison grazing patterns do differ from cattle, and Turner has shown that rotational grazing and ecosystem restoration will support his native grasslands. He has placed significant portions of his land under conservation easements, legally binding agreements that restrict future development. These easements ensure that even if the land is sold, it can't be subdivided or converted into urban or industrial use. In some cases, he's donated land outright to public conservation agencies. His Florida holdings include large areas of wetland and forest, while his Montana ranches span hundreds of thousands of acres of high plains, and in South Dakota and Nebraska, his land includes mixed-use prairie ecosystems that support agriculture and wildlife. Turner acquired most of this land through direct purchase using wealth generated from his media career, including CNN and Turner Broadcasting. And while he has gradually reduced some holdings in recent years, his verified public records show that he's one of the largest individual landowners in the world. His empire kinda shows that private land ownership on a continental scale still exists in the modern era, and that it can be structured around conservation rather than urban expansion or even resource extraction. Number 10. The Irving family. J.D. Irving Limited. It's one of the largest private land entities in the world and the single largest private landowner in Canada. Through J.D. Irving Limited, JDI, the Irving family controls about 3 million acres across eastern Canada and parts of the northeastern United States. The majority of land consists of contiguous, privately owned forest land, primarily located in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, Maine, and New York State. And unlike many large landowners whose property portfolios are fragmented or speculative, Irving land is almost entirely operational. The forests are actively managed for timber production, conservation, and long-term sustainability. New Brunswick is the core of the Irving land empire. In that province alone, Irving subsidiaries own or control roughly 1/3 of all the forested land, a level of concentration that's unmatched anywhere else in the world. The land supports pulp mills, paper manufacturing, sawmills, and downstream wood products that form the backbone of the company's integrated forestry business. These forests are not leased from the government, they're privately held freehold land, which is critical in distinguishing the Irvings from state-backed or concession-based landholders. Their land acquisition began in the early 20th century and expanded steadily through direct purchase rather than inheritance. Over the decades, the company acquired struggling timberlands, small private forests, and industrial land holdings which consolidated them into a huge continuous tract. This slow expansion is why their land empire receives far less public attention than flashier billionaires, despite its scale. Their forestry practices here have been both praised and criticized. Supporters point to long-term reforestation, consistent employment, and investment. Critics argue that such concentrated ownership gives a single private company outsized influence over ecosystems and habitats. What's not disputed, though, is the scale of the land under Irving control. Timberland of this quality is among the most sought-after real assets globally, combining renewable yield with inflation protection and long-term appreciation. Another cool feature is that it remains privately held and family-controlled, meaning the land has not been fragmented through public markets or inheritance divisions. Decisions about the land use are centralized and allows the company to operate its forests as a single integrated system rather than a collection of properties. And while they rarely discuss the land holdings publicly, the governmental data and academic research place their privately owned forested land at around 1.2 million hectares, a figure that's remained stable in recent years. Even conservative accounting places them among the largest private landowners in the developed world. In a global context, though, the Irving family stands out. Their land empire exists entirely within modern legal systems, without royal privilege, colonial land agreements, or even state allocation. It's the product of sustained private acquisition and long-term control. Number 9. John Malone. John Malone is the largest private landowner in the United States. As of the most consistently cited and verifiable figures, Malone controls about 2.2 million acres of land spread across multiple U.S. states. His land holdings are well documented through property filings and conservation easements. His portfolio is held primarily through a network of private entities rather than a single branded land company. The holdings span at least 8 states: Maine, New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Nebraska, and Arkansas. Much of the land consists of timberland, ranch, and undeveloped wilderness. In total acreage, his holdings do exceed those of Ted Turner and any other individual in the United States. One of his largest assets is timberland in Maine, where he's been one of the state's largest private landowners. Timberland is often favored by ultra-wealthy people because it combines income generation with a low development pressure and a strong inflation resistance. He also owns extensive ranch land in the western U.S., including properties in Colorado and Wyoming. They're generally used for grazing, conservation, or left largely undeveloped. Like Turner, Malone has placed portions of his land under conservation easements, which permanently limits development and any subdivisions. Unlike land empires built through inheritance or political authority, Malone's holdings were accumulated through direct market purchases. He's best known as the former head of Telecommunications Incorporated, TCI, one of the largest cable television operators in the U.S., and for his later investments in Liberty Media and his related companies. Malone has spoken publicly about land ownership as a form of legacy planning rather than speculation. His properties aren't designed for rapid resale or development, and many are intentionally difficult to access, and that approach has positioned his portfolio as a stable store of value. From a governance standpoint, though, the land holdings are entirely private and subject to standard U.S. property law. There's no special status or state allocation, and this makes his position notable. In a modern, fully developed economy with strong land regulation, he still managed to assemble a territorial footprint larger than many small countries. Even accounting for minor sales or even acquisitions, he remains firmly among the largest private landowners on Earth. He shows how large-scale land ownership in the 21st century increasingly favors low-profile accumulation of natural landscapes rather than visible estates or urban holdings. Number 8. Andrew Forrest. Through a combination of direct ownership, long-term pastoral leases, and indigenous joint ventures, Andrew Forrest controls more than 57 million acres of land across Australia. Forrest is best known as the founder of Fortescue Metals Group, one of the world's largest iron ore producers. However, his land empire exists largely outside of Fortescue, and it's held through private companies focused on agriculture. His land holdings are located in Western Australia, the Northern Territory, South Australia, and Queensland, spanning deserts, savannas, and even semi-arid grasslands. The cattle operations alone cover millions of acres, and they're managed at a scale rarely seen on private land. His acquisitions have included some of the largest cattle stations in Australia, each covering areas larger than many European countries. In aggregate, his properties stretch across climate zones and bioregions. A feature of his land strategy is the dual-use structure of it, commercial agriculture combined with environmental restoration. These efforts are documented through reports and partnerships with the Australian conservation bodies. Though Minderloo-linked initiatives, large portions of his land are involved in conservation programs and feral animal control. It's important to note that Australian pastoral lease acreage can be difficult to summarize precisely. However, conservative efforts place his controlled land well above 50 million acres, a figure that consistently appears in their financial and agricultural reportings. In a global context, though, he stands apart from most billionaires because his wealth isn't anchored in urban real estate or fragmented investments, but in continuous territorial-scale landscapes. By any factual, non-governmental measure, he ranks among the largest private landholders in the world, controlling a land area larger than the United Kingdom and approaching the size of entire mid-sized countries. Moving on to number 7, Stan Kroenke. Stan Kroenke is one of the largest private landowners in the world. It's largely concentrated in the western U.S. Through a network of privately held entities connected to the Kroenke Group, he controls about 1.6 million acres of land. Most of this is primarily composed of ranch land, not urban or real estate. His properties are spread across several states, including Wyoming, Montana, Texas, Colorado, and Nebraska. The centerpieces of his holdings are the Broken O Ranch in Montana, one of the largest contiguous ranches in the U.S. That covers roughly 120,000 acres. This ranch alone is larger than many national parks, and it supports cattle operations, horse breeding, and even wildlife conservation. Another major component of his portfolio is in Wyoming and Texas, where he owns multiple large-scale ranches that together span hundreds of thousands of acres. Much of the land, though, is undeveloped with limited infrastructure, and it reinforces its landholding nature rather than a short-term commercial use. Kroenke's land accumulation began decades before he became widely known as a sports franchise owner. While he's now famous for owning teams like the Los Angeles Rams and Denver Nuggets, the wealth that enabled his land acquisitions largely came from real estate development and retail investments, including early partnerships involving Walmart-affiliated projects through his marriage to Ann Walton Kroenke. His land holdings are entirely private. They're subject to standard U.S. property laws. There's no state grants, concessions, or sovereign arrangements involved here, and that makes his position notable in a highly regulated land market. He's assembled a territorial footprint larger than many small nations. He rarely speaks publicly about his land, and it functions primarily as a long-term store of value rather than a branding exercise. By any strict non-governmental standard, Stan Kroenke is among the largest private landowners on Earth. Number 6. Brad Kelly. Brad Kelly is one of the largest private landowners in the U.S. and, by extension, one of the largest private landholders in the world. Based on land registry data, investigative reporting, and conservation filings, he owns approximately 1 million acres of land, primarily concentrated in the southeastern United States. Kelly made his fortune as the founder of Commonwealth Brands, a tobacco company that was later sold to Imperial Tobacco for about $1.9 billion in 2007. After exiting the tobacco industry, he began systematically acquiring land, focusing on timberland, farmland, and large rural tracts rather than residential or real estate. The majority of his land holdings are located in Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida, with a large concentration in Tennessee. There alone, he's been cited as the largest private landowner in the state, owning hundreds of thousands of acres spread across multiple counties. His land is held through a network of private entities rather than a single branded holding company, which is common among ultra-large landowners seeking privacy and operational flexibility. Unlike ranching empires in the western U.S., Kelly's land is generally non-contiguous. It's spread across many parcels rather than a few massive ranches. He's known for maintaining a low public profile and rarely comments on his land holdings, so as a result, precise figures can vary slightly depending on whether newly acquired or divested parcels are included. But even conservative estimates place his holdings at or near 1 million acres, a threshold few private people worldwide even exceed. Number 5. The Emerson family. Sierra Pacific Industries, owned by the Emerson family, controls about 2.5 million acres of land in the United States, makes him one of the largest landholding groups in the world. The Emerson family's land empire is almost privately owned timberland, primarily located in California, Oregon, Washington, and the southeastern U.S. Their company, Sierra Pacific Industries, is one of the largest lumber producers in North America, and it operates as an integrated system of forests, sawmills, and wood product facilities. The Emerson family accumulated their land through decades of systematic acquisition. They purchased tracts from struggling logging companies, paper producers, and institutional investors, and they consolidated them into long-term holdings. And most of the family's land is actively managed. Harvesting cycles here are planned decades in advance, and replanting is a standard procedure. The forests aren't speculative assets, they're industrial landscapes designed to operate indefinitely. But because it's privately held, detailed disclosure is limited. Acreage figures are widely cited in industry reporting, and all of which consistently place the company's land holdings above 2 million acres. Their forests are located in some of the most valuable timber-growing regions on the planet, giving their land a much higher economic output per acre than arid ranch land or a desert pastoral lease. This places the Emerson family firmly among the largest private landowners in the world by verified acreage, and it remains fully private. It's not leased from the government and not subject to concession-based ownership. Number 4. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Through a complex network of church-owned entities, trusts, and subsidiaries, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints controls well over 2 million acres of land globally, with some estimates placing it much higher. Exact totals aren't publicly disclosed, so conservative figures here are used. The land holdings include farmland, ranch land, timberland, orchards, urban property, and undeveloped land, primarily in the U.S., but also in Latin America, Australia, and other regions. In the U.S. alone, the church is among the largest agricultural landowners, with major holdings in Florida, Nebraska, Utah, Idaho, and Texas. The church land is held primarily through affiliated investments in agricultural entities rather than directly under ecclesiastical titles. The structure allows for a centralized management while also complying with local property and tax laws. Revenue generated from these lands support church operations, welfare programs, and long-term financial stability. The LDS Church controls large, contiguous rural landscapes, and it places it in a different category of landholder entirely. Much of this land is operated with long-term horizon and minimal development pressure. And because they don't publish consolidated land acreage figures, scholars and journalists have to rely on property records, agricultural filings, and investigative reporting. But while estimates vary, there's a broad agreement that the church controls millions of acres. And importantly, this land is privately owned, not state-owned, not leased through concessions, and not held under sovereign authority. It's purely institutional private property. By any reasonable conservative accounting that excludes governments and royal estates, the LDS Church ranks among the largest private landowners in the world. Number 3. Weyerhaeuser. Weyerhaeuser is one of the largest private landowners in the world and the largest private timberland owner on Earth. The company owns or controls approximately 12 million acres of timberland across the U.S. and Canada. Founded in 1900, Weyerhaeuser operates as a real estate investment trust focused on timber, wood products, and forest management. Its land holdings are concentrated in the Pacific Northwest, the U.S. South, and the Lake States and parts of Canada. Weyerhaeuser's land is economically dense, and it's capable of generating a sustained yield through carefully managed harvest cycles. These forest cycles are managed on rotations that often span up to 25 to 40 years, with continuous replanting following the harvest. This technically means that the same land can generate timber revenue indefinitely without being converted to any other use. Weyerhaeuser also owns additional land under long-term licenses and manages millions more acres through joint ventures, though the 12 million acre figure refers only to the land it owns outright. One feature of their land empire is the contiguity at scale. Many of the forest holdings consist of massive landscapes spanning hundreds of thousands of acres. These are large enough to support entire regional ecosystems, watershed, and wildlife corridors, while still functioning as a timberland. Portions of the land are periodically sold for development or recreation, but the core strategy is the long-term ownership. Even after selective divestments, the company consistently remains above 10 million acres owned. That keeps it firmly among the world's largest landholders. In a global context, few private entities control land at this scale, while operating entirely within modern corporate and legal systems. Their holdings alone exceed the total land area of countries like Switzerland or the Netherlands. By any strict definition excluding governments and royal states, Weyerhaeuser is among the largest private landowners in human history. And that brings us to number 1, Australian Pastoral Company. The Australian Pastoral Company is the largest private landholder in Australia and one of the largest in the world, measured purely by surface area. The company controls about 15 million acres across Australia, a figure that's consistently cited in industry reporting. They were founded in 1824. Australian Pastoral Company, APC. It's one of the oldest continually operating agribusinesses in the world. Its land holdings are concentrated almost entirely in what's known as pastoral leases, which are the dominant form of large-scale land control in Australia's interior. Now, while these leases differ legally from freehold title, they do grant exclusive long-term rights to use and manage land for grazing and often spans decades with renewal rights. Their portfolio of land spans Queensland, the Northern Territory, South Australia, and Western Australia, covers deserts, rangelands, savannas, and semi-arid grassland. They operate more than 20 major cattle stations with a herd size typically exceeding about 150,000 head of cattle, depending on the season. And these properties are not fragmented parcels, they're massive contiguous landscapes. APC's land is operationally unified. Every acre is managed as part of a single system focused on beef production, land regeneration, and sustainability, and that makes APC's land control unusually coherent at an extreme scale. Ownership of Australian Pastoral Company has changed over time, but it remains firmly in private hands. The company is currently owned by Australian Agricultural Company Limited, some linked private investment interests, and associated private equity stakeholders. Now, importantly, it's not state-owned, it's not a crown corporation, and not controlled by any government authority. Because Australian pastoral leases are publicly recorded and mapped, their total land control is unusually transparent compared to many ultra-large landholders in the world. While exact figures can fluctuate slightly due to the lease renewals or divestment, 15 million acres is a conservative, repeatedly verified figure. In global comparisons that exclude governments and monarchies, Australian Pastoral Company is at the very top tier of private landholders. Very few corporations or families control land at this scale. By strict, factual, non-governmental standards, the APC Company qualifies as the largest private land controlling entity in the world, making it a fitting and defensible number 1 for this list.